framing. You can't just smack cement board on the walls. The first thing you need to do is check that all your studs are even. This is really important because if they're not, that is going to be reflected on your cement board. Cement board will flex. Also, the studs need to be 16 inches on center, maximum for half-inch cement board. Really important. And if they're not, you can add studs inside the wall like I'm doing here. You just want to make sure that that new stud doesn't bump out the wall because it will bump out the cement board. So here's a question. What if one of your studs is bumping out? Well, you can use an electric planer and plane it down. That's exactly what I'm doing here. It is a dusty process, so it's probably good to wear a respirator if you don't have a bag. And then you can just check to make sure that the studs are even and plumb. The next step, which a lot of people skip, is to add 1/4 inch plywood strips between the bottom of the cement board and your floor. You need that as an expansion and contraction joint. I'm also using 1 5/8 inch Durock screws. These are specifically for cement board. Don't use drywall screws. A lot of people do that. It's a big mistake. First of all, they're not strong enough. And secondly, the alkali in the cement board will break those down. I'm adding my second panel here. And another big tip for you is to pull the sticker off the board. The sticker is a bond breaker for your waterproofing and it's easy to pull off and somewhat satisfying. The other thing that I'm doing is spacing my screws every 8 inches on the center of the stud per the manufacturer. That's important. I'm also getting a measurement between the ceiling and the top of my second board here so that I can then cut it the size. I want to leave about an 1/8 inch gap at that ceiling. And the other thing is with a cement board, you don't necessarily need a carbide knife. You can strike your line and cut it using a very sharp utility blade. There's really not much to it. You're just cutting through the mesh and then bending the board back like you would for drywall. Very easy to cut. Just make sure you get an accurate measurement there. Then I'm placing the board on top of the second. You want about an 1/8 inch expansion joint between the second and third board and peel the sticker and then double check to make sure that the boards have remained plumb and even on the wall. By the way, if you're liking this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you need step-by-step help, check out our online courses and make your project easier at homerepairtutor.com. I recommend setting the main shower wall first, then your side walls. Now in this case, I have a curbless shower, so I have to notch out the cement board so that it will fit both on the outside and the inside of the shower. And that's very easy to do because I'm just placing my 1/4 inch plywood on the floor and then cut this little notch out using a utility knife. Again, if you just use a utility knife that's sharp, it's very easy to cut your cement board to size. But as you can see here, I'll be placing this inside the shower on top of that 1/4 inch plywood so that I have my expansion joint. I then place a screw in the cement board and I pull the plywood out from underneath, and that preserves that expansion joint. Then I just add my screws, I get my measurement up from the top of the first board to the ceiling, and I simply cut that second one to size using a utility knife and my level. And it's very easy. The other thing I do recommend, even though I'm not doing it, is to wear a silica dust respirator. I'm talking on camera here, even though you can't see it, and make sure that these boards fit nice and flush with your studs. You can also draw a line on the face of the cement board using your level to indicate where the stud is located so you don't miss it with your screws. Once again, I make sure that all the panels are nice and plumb and even with each other to make sure that my tile work will look good in the end. The plumbing wall inside a shower is probably the most challenging section to add your cement board, but I'll give you some tips to help out. So in this case, I have a pipe nipple for my shower wand. I mark the position of that, and then I cut it out using a carbide hole saw. Really great tool to have for this. This allows me to get the cement board closer to the valves, which I then mark with a marker. I then bump the board up against that marker, and that makes a mark on the back of the board. From there, what I do is I have a mixing valve seal. I'm going to be using this later on, and I center that on the marker and draw my circle, which I then score using a utility knife. Again, I'm just using a utility knife for most of this. I score the front and the back of the board, then I use a hammer to punch that out. Very easy, right? That allows me to then get the mark for my diverter valve. So if you have a diverter valve, this is going to be easy. You just mark that again with the marker just to make sure you have it in the right location. You bump the board up against that, and now what you can do is cut that out with another carbide hole saw. This will help you get the board nice and flush up against the valve. Just double check that you've got enough space to operate. And then in this case, I had to cut back the drywall using an oscillating multi-tool. So I just fit the tool up against that. Now here's the deal. If you've got plumbing going through your studs, make sure you add your steel plates before you attach your board to the studs. Really important to do this anywhere you have a pipe penetrating through the studs. That way you don't have a screw go through the plumbing. You can also mark the position of the stud on the face of the board using your level. That way you can quickly add your screws through the 1/2 inch cement board and into the studs every 8 inches. All right, our cement board's on the wall. Now I have to waterproof it using Curry membrane and Schluter All-Set. This is a thin set mortar, and the most important thing that I have to do is add the right amount of water to my bucket. So this is 8 quarts of water per the instructions for a 50-pound bag of Schluter All-Set. Really, really important to add the water first, then the thin set mortar because that cuts down on the dust. And also it really makes mixing this so much easier because your water's at the bottom. So I'm mixing up a full bag. Trust me, you're going to need this for 3 walls in a shower. I set a timer for 5 minutes because I have to mix this for approximately 5 minutes to get the right consistency. If you don't do this correctly, that thin set mortar is not going to be creamy enough to bond the Curry membrane to the cement board. As you can see, this is fairly fluid, and that's what you want for this application. Also, make sure you do this step. A lot of people forget it, but you have to dampen the cement board one panel at a time before you add your membrane. So I'm just adding a damp sponge to the face of the cement board on the panel that I'm going to be immediately setting the Curry membrane over. This is important because cement board is dry and it's going to wick the water out of your thin set mortar if you don't dampen it. And if it does that, guess what? Your Curry membrane is not going to bond properly. The other thing that I'm doing is using the flat side of my trowel to apply the first coat of thin set mortar to the face of the board. Notice how I'm just using this on one panel. I'm not going to go and do this for the other 2 walls, just one wall at a time. Then I'm going to trowel the thin set in using my Curry trowel. And this is important that you go in one direction because then that way, when you add your Curry membrane over top of this, it's going to compress all those trowel ridges and make sure that the Curry membrane will bond properly to the cement board. So I'm just working my way up the wall. I'm going to cut slices in the membrane for the valves as well as all my plumbing. I'm going to waterproof this later. Then what I'm going to do is smooth this out and check my coverage. I'm just using a 6-inch joint compound knife to do this. So once again, I'm just doing one wall at a time. Then I'm cutting out the section for my shower niche and ensuring that the membrane lays nice and flat up against the flange. So this is what it looks like in the end. Everything is 100% waterproof and ready to go. Again, if you like this video and it helped you out with your cement board installation, give it a thumbs up and I'll see you in the next tutorial.
Okay, so before we do the drywall, let's go over the waterproofing and overcoming the tub flange. So one of the things I want to explain to you here is this tub flange is obviously sticking outside of the stud area.